Readers, we are going to continue our work in historical fiction and understanding the characters in a deeper way by following this objective. I can think across timelines by tracking both my characters' life events and the historical timeline in which my story is set. So, today we're really going to be thinking about what the character timeline is and what was happening in history during that time. So we're going to be taking a look at some timelines and doing comparing. I thought I would just remind you, at the beginning of this school year, we did something called life maps. And those life maps were actually timelines of your lives. So I have at the top the historical timeline, and at the bottom, I actually have my timeline of my life and the things that have been big and important in my lifetime. Okay? And at the top, I decided to do some research and compare like what was happening in history during that time period and compare that to my own life. That might just help you to understand me a little better and maybe facing some of the things that happen in history and what happened in my own life. Let me explain how that relates to characters and books. So, looking at historical timelines and character timelines. Let's take a look at Pink and Say now. Based on the evidence I found yesterday, we heard about the Mexican-American War. So I actually went and did some research to find out when that happened. I also wanted to think back to all the work we did with the Revolutionary War, and I also kept track of when that took place. So the Revolutionary War happened first, then several years later, the Mexican-American War happened, and then we now have the time that Lincoln was president. And it's important to know what took place when Lincoln became the president. The Civil War was taking place when he was president. So that's the historical timeline of Pink and Say and during that time period. Now, we know that during the Revolutionary War, we studied a whole bunch of different events. Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party. There were so many things that happened in that short little chunk of time on our timeline. I didn't list every little thing. We can assume there were a lot of little things that happened and a lot of wars and battles, or not wars, but a lot of battles and different instances that took place during the Civil War as well. We just don't know what those events are if we haven't done research about them. The same thing could be said for the Mexican-American War as well. So looking at Pink and Say, we know it is happening sometime when Lincoln is president. We know that he became, because I did research, we now know that Lincoln became president on March 4th, 1861. Civil War began about a month after he became president. And then, April 9th, 1865, 4 years later, the Civil War has ended. And it was just a few days after the war ended that Lincoln was assassinated. So we know that Pink and Say is taking place sometime between when the Civil War began and when it ended, because Lincoln is still president in that text. And so this is the time frame we're looking at. We don't really know. This book doesn't give us a whole bunch of events, but this helps us to understand about when this time and this story is taking place. Why is this so important? Why do we need to worry about timelines when we're reading historical fiction? It deepens your understanding of the text and the time period. And it deepens your understanding of the character and what the character is going through. So your assignment today is to reread the historical fiction text Pink and Say by Patricia Polacco. You are then going to do some extra research to deepen your understanding of the topic of the Civil War time period. You're going to record your new learning. Some things that I want you to consider and maybe possibly doing research on is, why was Lincoln assassinated? That might be significant and give you some help in deepening your thinking. Another thing, why did the Civil War happen? What was the Civil War about? What were they fighting for? And then another thing that you could do some research on is the time period we know is slavery. So what was going on with slavery during this time period? Hopefully that will help you to deepen your thinking and understanding this topic, and understand exactly what Pink and Say we're dealing with, we're going through, so that you can understand them better.